I never thought a simple family barbecue would turn into the day my own son humiliated me beyond repair. The ice water hit my face so suddenly that I gasped. It was freezing, shocking. My breath caught as the cold soaked through my blouse, clinging to my skin. The entire backyard went dead silent for a split second, and then came the laughter. Not from strangers, but from my own son's friends. From Sabrina. Even from a few of my so-called neighbors. Derek stood in front of me, the beer bottle dangled from his hand as his voice rose again. "You need to cool down, selfish woman," he shouted. "All I asked was a signature. It's for the kids, but you'd rather hoard everything like some paranoid old hag." I stood there, water dripping down my cheeks, frozen in place. My knees trembled, but I locked them straight. I refused to let them see me stumble. Behind him, Sabrina covered her mouth, but I saw the smirk she couldn't hide. She whispered something to her friend, and they both giggled as they watched me stand there like a soaked fool. Derek's friends exchanged glances, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. After all, this was his housewarming party, or so they thought. I hadn't even wanted to be here. Sabrina had sweetly suggested a casual barbecue to celebrate Derek's future ownership, as if my home had already been handed over. But I hadn't signed anything, not yet, and now I never would. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater. My pride burned hotter than the humiliation. This house wasn't just property. This house was my husband's final gift before cancer took him. It was my shelter when I raised Derek alone. Every brick held my sweat, my tears, my years. And here I stood, soaking wet at my own backyard barbecue, surrounded by people who would have happily watched me vanish, just so they could split up what I built. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to slap that mocking grin off Sabrina's face. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered only 4 words, steady and ice cold. "You'll regret this, Derek." His face twitched. A flicker of surprise, or maybe fear, but he quickly masked it with bravado. "No, you will, Mother," he sneered. "One way or another, you're signing. Don't forget who takes care of you." I said nothing. I simply turned and walked back inside, leaving wet footprints across the patio tiles. My pulse roared in my ears, but my steps stayed firm. I would not cry in front of them. Not this time. They thought they had me cornered, but they had no idea what they had just set in motion. Inside my quiet living room, I shut the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, letting my heart beat slow. The faint sound of laughter still floated in from the backyard, but I blocked it out. The house felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because everything had changed. I walked toward the mantel, my wet sweater clinging cold against my back, and stared at the row of old photographs lined up neatly along the shelf. There was one of Derek as a little boy, grinning proudly with his missing front teeth, holding a fishing rod almost too big for him. His father, Tom, stood behind him, steadying the pole with a patient hand. I swallowed hard. Tom had been gone 20 years now. If he were here, this wouldn't be happening. I ran my fingers lightly over the frame, feeling the tiny nicks in the wood where Derek had once knocked it over during one of his wild chases around the house. Back then, he was my entire world, my only child, my reason for enduring those long nights after Tom passed. I took 2 jobs, skipped vacations, and counted every dollar just to make sure Derek never felt the weight of what we had lost. I thought I had done right by him. I thought raising him alone had made us stronger, closer. But somewhere along the way, my love became something he felt entitled to. Like the years I sacrificed belonged to him. Like my home was nothing more than his inheritance waiting to be claimed. The hum of the refrigerator kicked on behind me. The smell of roasted meat wafted faintly from outside as the party continued. My hands balled into fists at my sides. It wasn't supposed to come to this. A knock came at the back door. Sabrina's voice, light and sugary, seeped through. "Come on, Mom, don't be dramatic. Just come sign the papers and let's enjoy the evening." I didn't move. I didn't answer. Instead, I let her voice fade into the background as I stood there, wet, humiliated, furious, staring at the smiling faces frozen in time on the mantel. They loved my sacrifices. They loved my money. But not me. And I was finally starting to see the difference. Just days before the backyard humiliation, it had already begun. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter when Derek came in, shutting the door a little too firmly behind him. The tone in his voice was calm, but beneath it was that thin thread of pressure I'd come to recognize, the kind that always came right before a demand. "Mom," he started, smiling like we were just having a casual chat. "I've been thinking about the future, for the kids, for Sabrina and me. And this house, it's too much for you now." I kept wiping the counter, pretending not to hear the shift in his tone. "It'd be a great investment property," he continued, leaning in like he was sharing a brilliant idea. "We could renovate it, rent it out for a while, and when the kids are older, they'd have something solid waiting for them." I finally set the cloth down and looked at him. "This is my home, Derek," I said softly. "I'm not ready to give it up." He laughed, that dismissive, little chuckle that grated against my nerves. "Mom, you're not giving anything up. You'd still live here, of course. We'd just transfer ownership, get the financials lined up. Everything would stay exactly the same. On paper, it's just smarter." I stared at him, and in that moment, I realized this wasn't about planning for the kids. This was about control, about positioning, about greed, thinly disguised as concern. "I've worked my whole life for this house," I said, my voice steady. "This is my safe place, Derek. After everything your father and I went through, after raising you on my own, I earned this." The smile slipped from his face for just a moment. Then he reached for my hand, like I was being unreasonable. "Mom, don't be so emotional about it. We're family. What's mine is yours. What's yours will be mine eventually anyway. Why not make it official now? Sabrina says it'll simplify everything." Sabrina. Of course, always Sabrina, whispering in his ear. I pulled my hand away and stepped back. "No, Derek, I'm not ready to sign anything. This is my home." His eyes darkened. The charm vanished, replaced by frustration. But he didn't argue. Not yet. Not then. It didn't take long for Sabrina to make her next move. She didn't confront me directly. She never did. That wasn't her style. Instead, she worked quietly, skillfully, like slipping a knife between ribs without leaving a mark. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The awkward glances, the hesitant small talk at church, the neighbor who suddenly seemed too busy to stop and chat during her morning walks. But the whispers grew louder even when they pretended to speak softly. "You know she hasn't been herself lately. I heard she's having trouble managing the house. Big place for an older woman, don't you think? Maybe it's time someone else stepped in. For her safety." And I knew exactly where it was coming from. That woman was clever. I'll give her that. She knew how to plant seeds in just the right places, never directly, always whispered through someone else. She wasn't shouting for control. No, she was playing the long game. Subtle, manipulative, calculated. At church, even my old friends started looking at me differently, like they were waiting for me to admit something was wrong. As if I would confess I was confused, overwhelmed, unable to handle my own life. Carol noticed it first. After service, as we sat under the old oak tree sipping lemonade, she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They've started spreading rumors, you know." I kept my face calm, but my stomach twisted. "What rumors?" Carol's eyes flicked across the parking lot. "That you're unstable, forgetful. That you're letting the house fall apart. They say Derek's just trying to help you before things get worse." I swallowed hard, forcing my lips into a thin smile. "I see. I told them it's nonsense, of course," Carol said quickly. "You're sharper than anyone I know. But you know how people are. They believe what's easiest." Of course they do. Because people love a simple story. The aging widow, slipping slowly into frailty, stubbornly refusing to let her loving children help her. It was the perfect narrative for Sabrina to spin. And Derek? He was going along with it. Whether he believed it or not, He was letting her write the story for both of them. I felt the heat rising in my chest. After everything I had done, after years of scraping and sacrificing for Derek, now I was some fragile old woman who needed to be managed? No, not me. I stood up from the bench, brushing imaginary crumbs from my skirt, steadying my voice. "Let them talk, Carol." She blinked at me, a bit surprised. "You're not worried?" "I'm furious," I answered, my tone even, steady. "But I won't give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattle. Not now." I felt Carol's hand squeeze mine gently. "You're stronger than they know." I nodded. "That's what they're about to learn." Inside, though, I knew this was only the beginning. Sabrina was trying to build a case. Not legal yet, but social. So when the time came to push harder for control, she'd have her chorus ready to echo her lies. But what they didn't know, not Derek, not Sabrina, not their little circle of whisperers, was that while they plotted, I was already preparing. I wasn't going to just defend my home, I was going to own this fight. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied. And with every rumor Sabrina planted, with every sideways glance from neighbors who used to smile freely at me, I felt something inside me shift. Not fear, not even anger. Focus. That's when I began my file. I pulled out an old binder from the closet, the one I used to keep Derek's school records in, back when life was simple and my biggest worry was making sure his report cards stayed clean. Now, it would serve a new purpose. I started printing out copies of every text message Derek sent about the future of the house. I recorded every phone call where he mentioned transferring the deed for the kids. I wrote down dates, times, exact words. I even jotted down what people like Mrs. Appleton and Mr. Callahan said to me, in case their whispers came up later. Then came the videos. I set up my phone during family dinners, quietly recording Derek's casual remarks about how soon the paperwork would be finalized. He was so confident, so sure I would eventually bend. Carol was the only one who knew what I was doing. My oldest friend, my anchor. She'd seen me through losing Tom, through raising Derek alone, through everything. When I told her about the rumors Sabrina was spreading, she shook her head with quiet disgust. "You've always been too soft on them," she said. "But not anymore. You're stronger than you think, Doris." I didn't argue with her, I just nodded. Because for the first time, I believed it too. It was the flyer that caught my eye. Tacked to the bulletin board at the community center, half covered by notices for yoga classes and lost cats. Plain white paper, bold black print. Free legal seminar, elder rights and property protection. Learn how to defend your assets from family pressure. I stood there, staring at it for a long moment. It almost felt like someone had pinned it there just for me. The seminar was that evening. My first instinct was to dismiss it. I wasn't some victim of elder abuse, not yet. I still had control. But hadn't I also thought Derek would never turn on me? That Sabrina would never dare spread rumors behind my back? I tore off one of the little pull tabs with the contact information and tucked it into my purse. By 6 p.m., I was sitting in a folding chair inside a small room at the back of the center. About 20 others sat scattered around me, mostly women like myself, quiet but alert, faces lined with years of worry. A few had brought thick folders, as if they were already deep into some private legal war. The man at the front was a lawyer. Young, sharp, not one of those flashy types. He didn't wear an expensive suit, just a crisp button-down and a steady gaze that met each of us like we mattered. He started simply. "Many of you are here because someone you love, or thought you loved, is trying to take something that belongs to you." His voice was calm, not dramatic, just painfully true. Heads nodded around me, mine included. He spoke about powers of attorney, title transfers, guardianship manipulation, undue influence, terms I had heard but never really thought would apply to me. He explained how easy it was for family members to build a narrative of quote, concern in order to legally sideline someone, and how hard it was to undo once that train left the station. I listened carefully, taking notes. My pen moved faster than it had in years. "Documentation is your shield," he said. "Every conversation, every threat, every offer made under pressure, the more you record, the stronger your position becomes." I thought of my notebook sitting at home, the voice recorder Carol had given me. I was already doing what he described, instinctively protecting myself before I even fully knew why. After the seminar ended, I waited until most people had left before approaching him. "Mr. Hartman?" I said quietly. He turned to me with a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am?" I introduced myself, then added, "I believe my son and his wife are preparing to push me out of my home. They're starting to make claims about my mental stability." His expression didn't change. No surprise, no judgment, just calm focus. "You've begun documenting, I assume?" he asked. I nodded. "Everything. Written, recorded, dated." "Good," he said. "That will make a world of difference if they escalate this legally." I hesitated, my throat tightening. "Do you think they can succeed?" He held my gaze firmly. "Not if you stay ahead of them. And you already are." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, a tiny crack of light, pushing through all the fear and humiliation. I thanked him and left the center that night with a strange kind of calmness settling inside me. Not peace, not yet, but preparation. I was no longer reacting to what they might do. I was preparing for what I knew was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It was nearly midnight when I heard Derek's voice drift from the kitchen. I had gone to bed early, pretending exhaustion. But the weight of everything pressing on me made sleep impossible. The house creaked under the summer heat, and I found myself sitting in the dark, listening. Then his voice cut through the silence. Low, confident, dangerous. I crept from my room and moved down the hallway with careful, deliberate steps. The door to the kitchen was cracked open, just enough for me to see the faint glow of his phone screen reflecting off his face. "She's close," Derek was saying. "You know how she is. So stubborn. But she's slipping. I'll get her to sign eventually. Might take another push, but Sabrina's working on the neighborhood. We'll make sure everyone knows she's not capable of handling the place much longer." I felt my stomach turn. His voice was steady, cold, no hesitation, no doubt. The concern he put on like a mask during family gatherings was gone. This was the real Derek, calculating, detached, already deciding how to cut me out of my own life. But what if she refuses again? I heard a muffled voice say from the other end of the call. Derek chuckled. "She will. But we're setting the stage. Sabrina's got half the church ladies already whispering. Once we get a doctor involved, suggest a wellness evaluation. The court won't have a choice. It'll be for her own good, officially." My legs felt weak, but my mind sharpened instantly. That was their plan. Declare me incompetent, legally remove me from decision-making. And once that was done, they'd own everything. I slipped my hand into my robe pocket, feeling for the small recorder Carol had given me. My fingers found the button, and I pressed down. The red light flickered on. I stood there, barely breathing, letting his words sink in as the device quietly captured every one of them. "Once she signs the house over, or the court appoints us conservators, we can refinance, sell it, whatever we want. The market's peaking. It's now or never." My chest burned, but I kept my breathing steady. The phone call went on for another few minutes before I heard Derek finally hang up. I stepped back into the shadows before he left the kitchen, slipping upstairs without noticing me. I sat on the edge of my bed afterward, staring at the recorder in my palm. Proof. Hard, undeniable proof of what they were doing. This wasn't family concern. This was theft, wrapped in fake smiles and rehearsed sympathy. I replayed his words in my mind over and over. The betrayal didn't shock me anymore. That part was numb now. What struck me was how methodical it all was. How easily he could discuss dismantling my life like it was a business deal. The boy I raised was gone. But I wasn't. I placed the recorder gently in the drawer beside my bed and whispered to the dark, steady and calm. You want war, Derek? You'll get one. The first sign came in the mail, or rather, the lack of it. A week after I recorded Derek's late-night phone call, I noticed the stack of letters on the hallway table was thinner than usual. I flipped through them, my gut tightening. No bank statements, no utility bills, nothing official. Just a handful of junk flyers and a gardening catalog. Odd. By the third day, I knew it wasn't coincidence. I caught Sabrina slipping out from the mailbox one morning, pretending to adjust her sunglasses like she hadn't seen me watching from the porch. She offered her usual bright, sugary smile, the one she saved for public performances. "Good morning," she called sweetly. "Lovely weather, isn't it?" I said nothing. Just watched her walk back toward her car, calm, unblinking. Inside, though, my stomach churned. Sabrina wasn't bold enough to physically threaten me, not yet. But she was shifting to a new tactic now: paperwork manipulation. If they could control what notices reached me, they could control my awareness of what was happening behind my back. Bills could go unpaid, legal notices could go missing. And if anything spiraled out of control, if my taxes lapsed, if I missed payments, they'd swoop in, claiming I was no longer competent to manage the house. Derek was escalating. Quietly, slippery, hoping I wouldn't notice until it was too late. But I did notice. I pulled out my file that evening, the notebook growing fatter with each passing day, and added a fresh entry. July 22nd. Mail interference. Observed Sabrina retrieving mail. Missing statements. Suspected deliberate withholding of legal and financial notices. Then I opened a separate folder on my desk. Into it, I tucked the voice recorder and my written notes, labeling it with a simple word: defense. Carol visited again that afternoon. She saw me filing the latest entries and raised an eyebrow. "They're getting desperate," she said softly. "They know you're not folding, so they're trying to make it look like you're incompetent." I nodded. "They want the system to do their dirty work." Carol leaned closer, her voice dropping. "You're still meeting with that lawyer, aren't you?" "Tomorrow," I said. "Downtown. I've already made copies of everything." She smiled then. Not with pity, but with respect. "Good. You stay one step ahead." I sat back, breathing steady, letting that sense of growing resolve settle inside me. They thought I was weak because I wasn't screaming. They thought silence meant surrender. But I wasn't being silent. I was listening, and I was recording every single thing they did. Downtown was busy that day, but I felt strangely calm as I walked into the law office. It was a small building, nothing flashy, tucked between a bakery and a hardware store I'd passed 1,000 times before. A small, tidy space, tucked inside a tall brick building downtown. No fancy marble floors, no dramatic conference tables. Just bookshelves filled with binders and a worn leather chair across from the desk where Mr. Allen sat. He was older than I expected, maybe in his 60s. Sharp, but not showy. The kind of man who had seen every ugly family fight there was to see, and probably a few uglier ones. I laid my stack of evidence on his desk without a word. My notebook, the printed transcripts I'd typed up from the recordings, photos of the mailbox, my file labeled defense. He didn't rush. He flipped through everything carefully, meticulous. The only sound in the room was the quiet turn of pages and the occasional soft scratch of his pen as he jotted notes in the margins. After what felt like an eternity, he finally leaned back in his chair and looked at me squarely. "You've done more homework than most of my clients ever do before walking in here," he said. I allowed myself a small, tight smile. "I've had time." Mr. Allen nodded slowly. "Let me be very clear with you, Mrs. Morgan. What your son and his wife are doing, this slow build of rumors, this manipulation of your mail, even the threats you've recorded, it's textbook undue influence." Hearing it framed like that, like a legal diagnosis, made my stomach knot for a brief moment, This wasn't just some family argument anymore. This was a full campaign to rob me of my home and my rights. Can they win? I asked quietly. He folded his hands. If you stay silent and allow them to control the narrative, yes. Easily. That's how these cases go wrong. People think love will make their family stop before it gets that far. It rarely does. I nodded. That's why I'm here. His eyes softened just slightly, a flicker of respect breaking through his professionalism. Good. Because you have a very strong case, especially with that recording. He tapped the transcript where Derek's words were printed, clear as day. Once we get a doctor involved, the court won't have a choice. Mr. Allen continued. That statement alone shows intent. They're not concerned about your well-being. They're building a strategy to take control. And judges don't like seeing that. I swallowed hard, but kept my voice steady. So what do I do next? He leaned forward, voice calm but firm. You stay calm. Keep documenting. Continue recording every conversation. Don't confront them directly. Not yet. We'll file preliminary complaints for elder harassment and prepare to lock down your title legally. If they try to make any legal moves, we'll have a full defense ready. And if they don't stop? A small smile touched his lips. Then we take it to court. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled fully. The weight pressing on my chest lightened, even if just a little. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining their schemes. And I wasn't powerless. As I left the office that afternoon, the summer air felt different, lighter somehow, though the fight ahead remained heavy. They thought I was sitting quietly, waiting for them to win. They didn't see that I had already chosen my battlefield. Bingo night at the community center was a strange kind of therapy. The room buzzed with idle chatter, laughter, and the soft clatter of plastic chips on laminated cards. I sat at the folding table with Carol, pretending like everything in my life was normal, as if my son wasn't circling like a vulture outside my front door. B12, the caller announced. I smiled, dabbing my card, though my mind wasn't here. Not really. Every cheerful voice around me felt like background noise against the storm, quietly building inside my home. Don't let your face give you away, Carol whispered, leaning toward me. I'm fine, I replied softly, keeping my smile steady. She gave me a knowing look. You're not. But you're doing damn well at pretending, I sighed, letting the act drop for just a second. I have to, Carol. The more normal I act, the more they think I'm slipping into some harmless routine. They assume I'm aging into weakness. They're underestimating you, she said. That's their first mistake. And she was right. It was exactly what I needed them to do. Let them keep underestimating me. Let Derek and Sabrina believe I was just sitting at home, fading into gentle confusion while they quietly moved pieces into place. Let them think they could engineer my downfall, while I played bingo and made small talk. Because while they whispered in corners and plotted my removal, I was quietly preparing for something much bigger. I wasn't stalling out of fear. I was stalling because every day gave me more time to build my case. More time for them to make mistakes. More time for their arrogance to leave fingerprints on everything. And they were sloppy. Every bold move they made, stealing the mail, the recorded late-night conversations, Sabrina's whispered rumors around town, they were all quietly stacking up into a story the court wouldn't be able to ignore. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing over the small recorder tucked inside, my silent little witness. Still running, still gathering. And my lawyer? He was ready. Mr. Allen had already started filing protective paperwork on my behalf. My home's deed was being reviewed for any signs of interference. My financial records were secured. My legal line of defense was growing stronger every single day they underestimated me. Across the table, Carol sipped her tea and murmured, "You know, I always thought you were too patient for your own good." I smiled at her. "No, Carol, I was always patient for a reason." Outside, the summer night was warm and still when I finally walked back home. The porch light glowed softly. The wind chimes swayed gently in the breeze. I stood there for a moment, looking at the house, my house, with a steadiness that hadn't wavered in weeks. They thought I was sitting here, waiting for them to win, but the longer they circled, the closer they came to handing me exactly what I needed to bury them. The knock came early that morning. I was already dressed and waiting, sipping my tea by the front window when Derek's car pulled into the driveway. He got out with a folder tucked under his arm, too thin to be casual, too official to be harmless. Sabrina wasn't with him this time. She preferred to let him deliver the demands while she pulled the strings behind the scenes. But I knew she was watching. She always was. I opened the door before he had a chance to knock again. "Morning, Mom," Derek said, wearing that fake half-smile I recognized so well. "Got a few papers I'd like you to look over. Just some routine things for the house. It's not a big deal." I stepped aside and let him in, keeping my face calm. He sat at the kitchen table, placing the folder in front of me like some kind of offering. "Go ahead, take your time," he said, gesturing at the documents. "We just figured it would be good to get some things in order, you know? Make sure everything's secure. For them." I slowly flipped through the papers. Quietly, calmly. Title transfer forms, power of attorney drafts, medical proxy designations, all of it worded in that sweet, legally ambiguous language that sounds helpful. Protective even, if you aren't paying close attention. But I was paying attention. And while I read, my small recorder sat silently in my pocket, capturing every word. He smiled as I scanned the pages. "It's all pretty standard, Mom. If anything ever happens, God forbid, it just makes things easier for everyone. For everyone but me." I closed the folder gently. My hands didn't shake. My voice was soft when I finally spoke. "I appreciate you looking out for me, Derek, but I'm not ready to sign anything today." The smile slipped from his face for a brief moment. "There's no pressure. We're just thinking ahead. Sabrina and I talked to a financial planner. They said it's smart to plan early." "Yes," I said, nodding. "Planning is important." His jaw twitched. "Well, how much time do you need to think about it?" I let the silence hang for a beat longer than necessary, watching his patience thin. "Just a little longer," I answered. "You know how careful I like to be." He tried to keep his tone light, but I could feel the frustration bubbling just under the surface. "I mean, Mom, we're trying to help you. You don't want this all getting complicated later, do you?" I smiled then, not because I was happy, but because I wanted him to see it. The calm, the control, the fact that I wasn't folding. "Of course not, sweetheart," I said gently. "But you've always said I'm careful to a fault. That's just who I am." He forced a chuckle, but his eyes flickered. He knew I was stalling. And worse for him, he didn't know why. I stood up and walked him to the door, still wearing that polite, harmless smile. "Thank you for thinking of me," I said softly as he stepped onto the porch. "I'll let you know when I'm ready." He hesitated, searching my face for any sign of weakness, but I gave him nothing. "All right," he finally muttered, and walked off toward his car. As I closed the door behind him, my smile faded. I walked straight to my desk, pulled out my notebook, and added another entry. July 28th, coercion attempt, document signing. Derek presented legal forms attempting to transfer property ownership and establish medical proxy. Refused to sign. Conversation fully recorded. I sat back, exhaling slowly. They were pushing harder now. But every push was only adding to my file. And with each entry, my position grew stronger. By the time I filed for the restraining order, the fear was gone. It wasn't rage driving me anymore. It wasn't even sadness. It was something colder, sharper. A steady, deliberate kind of focus. The lawyer, Mr. Allen, had everything prepared. The documentation, the recordings, the written statements, all neatly organized and presented to the housing board and the court. My story, built piece by piece, was no longer something Derek or Sabrina could twist behind closed doors. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was moving. The restraining order was temporary at first, a protective measure filed under elder harassment statutes. It wasn't dramatic, but it was powerful. It limited Derek's access to me, to the house, to my financial affairs. It bought me the space I needed to secure everything legally before they could make another move. Mr. Allen handled every filing like a man who had done this too many times before. Efficient. Precise. His calm gave me strength. "The courts don't take these things lightly anymore, Mrs. Morgan," he said as we reviewed the paperwork together. "Elder financial abuse is becoming more common. They've seen plenty of cases like yours." "Good," I said softly. "Then they'll recognize it when they see it," he smiled. "Yes, and you've given us something most don't have. Airtight evidence." The housing board had been notified as well, along with the county recorder's office. We froze my property title, blocking any pending or future title changes unless signed directly by me, in person, with legal counsel present. No forged power of attorney. No quiet paperwork shuffle. Derek wouldn't be able to slide anything through behind my back. When I walked out of the courthouse that afternoon, I paused on the steps for a moment, breathing in the warm breeze. For weeks I had been suffocating inside my own home, feeling trapped, outnumbered, and cornered. But now I felt tall. Not victorious yet, but steady, rooted. Back home, Carol was waiting for me with fresh groceries and that fierce loyalty I had come to depend on. "You're really doing it," she said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "You're taking your life back." I nodded. Piece by piece. She glanced at my growing file on the kitchen table, the thick folder of recordings, notes, and filings. "They don't see it yet," she said softly, "but you're about to crush them." I didn't tell Carol right away. I simply invited her for tea like always. But she noticed the difference in me the moment she walked in. "You're glowing," she whispered, half joking, half in awe. "What did you do?" I poured her tea and finally let myself smile. I filed. Her eyes widened, then softened with quiet pride. "Good girl," she said softly. "They don't know it yet, but you just flipped the board." By that evening, the sheriff's office had already received the preliminary injunction order. They would be making the first official visit within the week. And Derek? Still oblivious, still believing he held the cards. Let him enjoy these last few days. The storm was coming. But this time, I controlled the weather. The knock came sharp and deliberate this time. Not Derek's knock, but official. When I opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch. Behind them, a third man in plain clothes held a large envelope marked with the county seal. The neighbors were already watching. Subtle glances from behind curtains, a few pretending to water their flowers, but I saw them all. "Mrs. Morgan?" one of the officers asked politely. "Yes," I answered calmly. "We're here to serve official notice of eviction proceedings against Derek and Sabrina Morgan, by order of the Housing Board and the County Court." He handed me the documents as the plainclothes officer stepped forward and attached the bright yellow notice directly onto my front door. Notice of eviction. Unauthorized occupants removed by court order. The words were bold, clear, undeniable. A car door slammed behind them. I turned and saw Derek pulling into the driveway, Sabrina at his side. The color drained from Derek's face as he saw the notice flapping in the breeze. He was out of the car before it had even fully stopped. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, storming up the walkway. Sabrina followed, her eyes wide and darting nervously at the gathering neighbors. "You can't do this, Mom!" Derek barked, his voice sharp, desperate now. "You can't just throw us out." The officers stepped calmly between us, firm but professional. "Sir, you need to step back. You're in violation of an active court order." I stayed silent, letting the weight of it all hang heavy between us. Sabrina grabbed his arm, hissing through gritted teeth. "You said she couldn't win." "You said she wouldn't have the guts." He shook her off, his face flushed, sweat beating at his temple. "You don't understand, Mom. This is our family home. You're being manipulated. Someone's feeding you lies." The desperation in his voice almost sounded sincere. Almost. I stared at him, my voice steady. "No one manipulated me, Derek. I documented everything you've done. Every lie, every whisper, every scheme. I saw it all. His mouth opened, then closed. He searched for some footing, but there was none. "You should have come to me first," he yelled. "We could have worked this out. Why would you go behind my back like this?" I let the smallest trace of a bitter smile touch my lips. "You went behind mine first." His jaw tightened. Sabrina tugged his arm again. "Derek, we need to leave. Now." He looked around then, really seeing for the first time the neighbors standing at their windows, the officers watching him, the growing crowd of witnesses to his humiliation. His carefully crafted image of the concerned, helpful son was unraveling right there on my front lawn. One of the officers stepped closer. His tone clipped. "Sir, if you continue to resist, we'll have no choice but to take you into custody for violation of the court order." Derek's hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a terrifying second, I thought he might actually swing at one of them, but then his shoulders sagged. "This isn't over," he spat quietly, eyes burning. "You'll regret this." "No," I said softly. "I won't." And I wouldn't. Not for a second. The officer stood firm until Derek finally turned and stalked back to his car. Sabrina hurried behind him, her mask of superiority shattered. The engine roared, and they sped out of the driveway as neighbors whispered behind closed windows. I stood there for a moment after they left, watching the yellow notice flutter gently in the wind. They thought they could humiliate me into surrender. Instead, they were the ones walking away, defeated and exposed. The banging on the door came just after sunset. Not polite knocking, not the calculated charm he usually wrapped himself in. This was raw, furious pounding, rattling the doorframe. I didn't flinch. I was already expecting him. "Open up, Mom," Derek shouted through the screen door, his voice wild. "You think you can do this? You think you can kick us out like criminals?" I stood calmly behind the locked door, my hands resting lightly on the counter. The officers had warned me to stay inside and not engage, but I wanted him to see me, to see that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. "You did this to yourself, Derek," I said, my voice low but steady, cutting through the thick evening air between us. "You pushed too far." Sabrina's voice screeched behind him, panicked now. "We gave you every chance, you ungrateful old witch." Derek slammed his fist against the screen again. "We're family. You think a piece of paper changes that? You've lost your mind, Mom. They'll see it in court." Behind me, the small red light on my recorder blinked steadily. Every word, every threat, every lie, captured. "You tried to steal my home," I answered. "You tried to take everything I built, everything I protected for this family. You stood in my kitchen with your fake concern, while you plotted to have me declared incompetent." "You're twisting it," Derek bellowed. "We were trying to help you. You're old. You don't need this house." I stepped closer to the door now, my voice like steel beneath velvet. "You didn't want to help me. You wanted to replace me." The officer stationed down the street began walking up the driveway, hand resting lightly on his belt as he approached. "Sir, you've been warned to cease contact," the officer called firmly. "You are in violation of a protective order. If you continue, we'll take you into custody." Derek turned to him, his rage boiling. "She's my mother. She's not right in the head. Look at what she's doing. She's tearing this family apart." I saw it then. The desperation shifting into full panic. He wasn't fighting for the house anymore. He was fighting because he realized control was slipping from his fingers, faster than he ever thought possible. The officer's voice was sharper now. "Sir, step away from the door." Sabrina grabbed his arm. "Derek, stop. Let's go." But he wouldn't move. His face twisted, his breathing ragged. "You'll die alone, you know that? After everything I did for you, you'll sit in this house by yourself and rot." The officer stepped between us, hand now fully gripping his holster. "That's enough." I didn't blink. I didn't break. Quiet doesn't mean weak. "Better alone than surrounded by leeches," I said calmly. "Better alone than used." The officer finally placed a firm hand on Derek's shoulder, pulling him back. "We're done here. Go. Now." Sabrina dragged him toward the car as his curses echoed into the darkening sky. The door slammed behind them, and the engine roared down the street once again. The officer stayed on my porch for a moment longer, his expression softening slightly as the tension eased. "You handled that well, ma'am," he said quietly. I nodded. "Thank you for staying close." He tipped his hat and left, his silhouette disappearing down the driveway. Inside, I locked the door behind me and stood there in the quiet. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. From something else. Relief. Resolve. Control. They thought I would crumble tonight, but all they did was hand me more evidence. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, though the air conditioning hummed quietly, but cold in the way that made your skin tighten. The kind of cold that comes from eyes watching, judging, waiting. Derek sat at the table across from me. His lawyer was young, clearly uncomfortable, flipping through the thin file they had managed to cobble together, mostly character statements and a stack of fabricated concerns about my declining ability to manage my affairs. Sabrina sat stiffly beside him, lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. She wore the same smirk she always wore when she thought she was winning. She had no idea that smirk wouldn't survive the next hour. My lawyer, Mr. Allen, sat calmly beside me, thick binder open, papers neatly organized. His confidence was a steady presence beside me, like a wall I could lean against. The judge entered, stern, gray-haired, tired of family drama, but sharp enough to slice through it. She wasted no time. "We're here to review the petition filed by Mr. Derek Morgan, requesting conservatorship over his mother, Margaret Morgan, citing concerns over her capacity to manage her property and financial affairs." Her eyes flicked between us. "I have reviewed the preliminary filings. Mr. Allen, you may proceed." Mr. Allen stood, calm, crisp, unshakable. "Your Honor, what we have here is not concern for my client's well-being. What we have is a calculated, months-long campaign of coercion, manipulation, and attempted financial exploitation." He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "We have documented conversations, multiple recordings, in which Mr. Morgan discusses plans to fabricate claims of incompetence for the purpose of seizing control of his mother's assets." Derek shifted uncomfortably. Sabrina's eyes darted toward him, her confidence cracking. Mr. Allen continued, sliding a flash drive across the table to the court clerk. "Your Honor, we submit into evidence audio recordings made in the defendant's home. You will hear Mr. Morgan discuss, in his own words, plans to withhold mail, secure fraudulent medical evaluations, and pressure his mother into signing over her home." The judge's face hardened slightly as she read the exhibit list. Derek's lawyer fumbled, his voice thin. "Your Honor, these recordings were made without Mr. Morgan's consent." The judge cut him off. "She was recording conversations inside her own home. Perfectly legal. Continue." Mr. Allen didn't flinch. "In addition, Your Honor, we have detailed written documentation, dates, times, witnesses, and notarized statements from neighbors and friends who were present during several of these coercive incidents." He placed the heavy binder gently on the judge's desk with a soft thump. Derek's lawyer looked lost, scrambling for something to say. "These are all misunderstandings. Mr. Morgan was merely trying to protect his mother." "From what?" the judge interrupted sharply. "From herself? Or from refusing to hand over the deed to her house?" Derek's mouth opened, then closed. His face reddened, veins pulsing at his temple. Sabrina sat frozen, her confidence draining fast, eyes wide now, calculating an exit that no longer existed. The judge sighed, flipping through the first few pages of evidence. "It's remarkable, Mr. Morgan, how thoroughly your mother has documented your actions." She looked up, locking eyes with him. "You came into this courtroom expecting me to believe she was incapable of managing her own affairs. What I see is a woman who is painfully clear-headed, organized, and fully aware of your intent." The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. Her voice lowered. "This petition for conservatorship is denied. Effective immediately, all protective measures filed by Mrs. Morgan will remain in place. Additionally, this court will refer the matter for investigation into elder financial exploitation. You are dismissed. The gavel struck. It was over. Derek's lawyer slumped back in his chair. Sabrina stared straight ahead, pale. Derek sat rigid, his chest heaving, unable to look at me. I stood slowly, calm as ever, and as I walked out of that courtroom, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The phone call came 2 weeks later. Mr. Allen's voice was calm, but I could hear the edge of satisfaction beneath it. The investigation is complete, Mrs. Morgan. The court has ruled in your favor. Not only is your home permanently secured under your name, but the judge has approved financial penalties for harassment, legal costs, and emotional distress. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing it in. The weight that had sat heavy on my chest for months finally began to lift. And Derek? I asked. He and his wife have been fined. The court has barred them from any future claims on your property or assets, Mr. Allen replied. There is nothing left for them to pursue. Nothing. That word rang sweet in my ears. No appeals, no loopholes, no second chances for them to circle back and try again. It was done. They had lost. Completely. When the official paperwork arrived, I sat at the kitchen table alone, opening each envelope carefully. Legal language filled every page. Cold, technical. But to me, every line was a victory. Every clause a shield that could never be broken. At the bottom of one document, printed in bold, permanent protective order, full retention of assets, Margaret Morgan. It was mine. All of it. And no one could take it from me again.